Once you get fishing and get your feet in water and catch a trout, you're gone.
Of course, the biggest trouble with the Hudson is access to the river where you can do this type of fishing, because you get almost as much line out the back as you do the front, and if you're not careful, you'll catch an Amtrak train instead of what you're after.
We are going to learn more about fly fishing now with some people who take it very seriously, including an entomology professor and a bait to fly fishing convert. All when we come back right here on the river. Fly fishing is a sport that's lured many a fisherman to it. It combines bait fishing with a knowledge of entomology, the study of insects. A collection of paintings, pictures, flies, and rods was on display recently at the Mid-Hudson Arts and Science Center in Poughkeepsie. Fly fisherman Slip Crauer says this now very popular sport began a long, long time ago.
Back in the 2nd century, only a couple of hundred years after Christ was born, there was a writer, a Aenean by name, wrote a good deal about natural history. And in the material that he wrote was a particular section on fly fishing, believe it or not. It came about that he observed flies that would light on the surface of the water and go down, and then they would be taken by a fish. He described it as a fish with nice color and spots would come up and suck these flies in from the surface of the water. Well, they found that even if they captured these flies, they couldn't use them. They were too fragile. So they developed putting a little red yarn and a little bit of feather on a hook. And so fly fishing really began back in the 2nd century AD. Well, then there were no books at that time or anything, but now let's do it this way. Think of Columbus discovering America, 1492. In 1496, just 4 years after Columbus discovered America, a book on fly fishing was published. And strangely enough, it was a woman. Dame Juliana Berners, a nun and a noblewoman at that too, was in this abbey, St. Albans Abbey, and she wrote this treatise on fishing with an angle. An angle, incidentally, is a rod. And in that book, she described 12 flies that she used. And just recently, someone wrote an article, and they had the tying of those flies that this dear old nun used way back in the 1400s. Of course, in thinking of fishing, you think of Isaac Walton. He became the patron saint of fishing, and really the giant, and everything so many people think started from Isaac Walton. Well, the dear old guy, he wrote beautifully, and his work was just as gentle as these chalk streams on which he fished. But he was a bait fisherman, really not a fly fisherman. But he had a young friend, this young man, Charles Cotton, again, from a very wealthy family as contrasted with Isaac himself. And he is the one who wrote about fly fishing. And in the 5th edition of Isaac Walton's Complete Angler, Charles Cotton had a section on it, on fly fishing. And I think perhaps people in reading it forget it was Charles Cotton and kind of associate that with old Isaac. And then, there was a proliferation of writers writing about fishing, and particularly fly fishing. And now, again, let's think of this. 1720, long before our Boston Tea Party and the American Revolution and everything else, a man by the name of John Gay wrote a book rural sports. And in it was this little poem, and I'll quote it. Let me cast the feathered hook with pliant rod across Pebble Brook. Well, that's the essence of fly fishing. And then more books, of course, came out. And the greatest man in American history of fly fishing probably was Theodore Gordon. He is the one who fished in the Catskills. He was ill with tuberculosis, I believe, but all of his life was devoted to fishing, and he perhaps got fly fishing really underway in the United States. But I think back to the time of Juliana Berners, who wrote this book on fly fishing, and now we've got in our display here a whole section given over to women. A good many people don't realize how much women have influenced fly fishing, and so we have some pictures here, and here is one of Elsie Darby. Harry Darby, her husband, was the one who was a great fly tyer, but then she took over and I think really tied better flies than Harry himself. And so there it is with some of her flies in a shadow box around them.
Also on display, flies made in the Catskills by some well-known fly tyers.
And these people, Walt Deddy, his wife Winnie, and daughter Mary, they all tie flies, and this is in Roscoe. And Roscoe is the mecca of fly fishing in the Catskills. This is the Beaverkill, the Willowweemock, the famous rivers, and these people have a shop there, and if you're in Roscoe, you always go visit the Deddys and at least pay your respects and look at their lovely flies. Now here's another. This is a famous pool on the Beaverkill, and this is a print of one of Ogden Pleisner's fine watercolor paintings. He does a beautiful job of all fly fishing pictures. And this is Hendrickson's Pool, it's called. And of course, there is a Hendrickson fly. So you see these names get tagged to water on a stream, and they have great meaning. Now here in this shadow box are typical flies with which you fish in the Catskills. But Ogden Pleisner is known to virtually everyone that fishes for trout or salmon. And of course here we have a picture of Art Flick. Here again is one of the great men of the Catskills. In modern times, Art died only a year or so ago. And he was one of the very fine fly tyers in the Catskills. Art tied a very delicate, beautiful fly, and they've become priceless. And Art was a fine, fine fisherman himself, a wonderful gentleman, and I'm glad to say that I had a wonderful friendship with him. We had a lot of good times together. And here again, you got an interesting fisherman, John Atherton, a famous artist in his own right. Actually, that was his primary mission in life, shall I say. He made some wonderful paintings. He too was a fly tyer. This deftness with his hands carried over into tying flies, and his flies, they were never sold or anything. He tied them all for his own use or gave them to his friends. And his wife is still living, and she is one of the women that carried on and is quite a fisherman in her own right, primarily for salmon. Another print here of a famous picture by Ogden Pleisner. Here is a man up probably on the Restigouche River, and a salmon is leaping out there, as you can see, and the rod is bent. And these are salmon flies in this shadow box here. I have a couple of Ogden Pleisner prints myself, and it's just fun to look at them and let your mind run on, and you almost are catching the fish yourself. Another great, Ed Hewitt, Edward R. Hewitt, a very wealthy man. As a child, his family took him to Europe. They would be at the famous spas and everything else, and as a little boy, he would get into some of the fishing in Germany and in Austria and things like that. He didn't need to work. He was a graduate chemist and an engineer, a fine musician, and he had water on the Neversink. Ed Hewitt's water now is under the dam, the Neversink Dam, the reservoir, flooded his part. But he tied flies. He was quite an innovator. He was one of the early men that recognized the value of nymphs. These are wet flies that represent a nymph that comes up to hatch out into a fly and fly away. And trout feed on them more than they do the actual fly. But he was, Hewitt was very, very positive. When he said something, that's the way it was. And it reminds me of this television program you'd see with E.F. Hutton or whatever it is. When E.F. Hutton talks, everybody listens. Well, I'll tell you, when Edward Hewitt talked, you better listen, because he had things to say, and you didn't want to argue with him.
Slip, who has lived all his 79 years in Poughkeepsie, confesses he wasn't always a fly fisherman.
Since this will be documented, I feel I must be honest. I started fishing bait, of course. Worms I put on a hook, and that's the way I got started fishing. But I ran into a friend, like Isaac Walton had Charles Cotton. This man, here in Poughkeepsie, I don't know how we got together, but he got interested. He tied flies. And I was a kid in high school and eager to go fishing, and he is the one that took me fishing and taught me how to tie flies. Way on back, more years ago than I like to remember now. And so from then on, it was all downhill. Once you get fishing and get your feet in water and catch a trout, you're gone.
Slip says fly fishing poses a greater challenge to him than bait fishing.
Worm fishing, it doesn't take quite the skill that it does to use a fly, and your tackle is much heavier. And after all, when a fish gobbles a worm and you hook him, you'd have to be a magician to lose him. It's pretty hard. Your tackle is fairly. Where when you're using flies, you're using a very light rod, you're casting with a leader 9, 12, 14 foot long, tapered down to maybe 0.06 of an inch in diameter. You're getting down rather coarse hair in your head, and that is on the end of your leader to which your fly is tied. So you've got to do it right, or you aren't going to catch your fish. And then the finesse of it, your fly has to be on the water, drifting correctly, or a fish looks and says fraud and turns away in disgust. No, you have to do it right. So it's a game. It's something like a golfer trying to make his shots good so he can get the ball in the hole.
Fly fishing used to be practiced mainly in lakes and streams, but as Slip tells us, it's now done almost anywhere.
Today, they fly fish for bonefish down in Florida and then the warm waters down there. They even fish for tarpon, believe it or not. Oh, yeah. And then, of course, in our own Hudson River here, they're fishing now for striped bass with flies. And again, another thing, your shad, as they come in to the Hudson and other freshwater streams, there is a good deal of fly fishing for them, along as fishing with darts with a spinning rod. But flies, yeah, they'll take shad. They'll take almost anything.
Slip says if the sport of fishing continues to grow in popularity, fishermen will have to become more aware of each other.
Fishing now is becoming so popular that many places are pretty crowded. And people are fishing and fly fishing as they never have before. It's becoming a very, very popular sort of sport. And so we're going to have to learn some lessons in courtesy and gentility if we're going to have good sport in the future.
An entomology professor at Marist College and an avid fly fisherman himself, George Hooper says mostly natural materials are used to create a fly.
A very common type of material are the feathers from chickens, the male chicken, the cock. This is a Plymouth Rock. This is another neck, we call them, from a male that has a little different coloration. Calf's tail, squirrel's tail, it's a little used from my earlier time. Deer tail, deer hair, very useful type of hair. This is dyed, and many of the feathers and fur and hair that is used is not the natural color, but also includes various dyes. This is turkey feather. I'll be using this today. It's turkey quill. Of course, it's dyed orange. This is another type of turkey feather, very filamentous. It's referred to as marabou. It's a marabou feather. We use tinsel, chenille, various types of chenille, sizes of chenille. Of course, the thread that we attach the materials onto the hook. Floss, which is a silk material.
George demonstrates his fly tying technique by creating a fly that would be used for shad fishing in the Hudson River.
There are proportions that one has to be aware of. One does not just tie the material on without trying to adjust where on the hook it should be placed. I should have a tail of a certain length, and so I'm very conscious of that when I am tying. I use this OptiVisor here. Many fly tyers do not use it because it seems to get in the way. But for me, it allows me to see what I'm doing, and it makes my, I'm very careful about in tying flies that the fly itself is just the way I want it to be. I don't want to be satisfied with something less than what I consider the perfect fly. So, so we have the marabou on, and next step will be to tie on some of the orange floss, which will serve as the body of the fly. And and I will also tie on a piece of tinsel here that will give it a little bit more color. as we will see in a minute. Now, once these materials are on, I'm prepared to complete the body, and it's a matter of winding. One always winds away from you. This will give me a very bright orange-colored body, and the tinsel, which I've attached when I put the floss on, will provide an additional attractor pattern to the fly. And the last material to be tied is some yellow chenille, and this fly is referred to as a shed dart. Although it's a wet fly, one can tie this yellow portion I'm going to tie in now, which will sort of form as a head, is lead in a shed dart that one would use if you were spin fishing, and the lead would certainly allow you to cast the fly a great distance. Of course, with a fly rod, one has to use the technique of casting that results in your throwing the rod back and forth, or moving the rod back and forth, and using the weight of the line to bring the fly out into the stream and to the location where you want it to be. And then we make a head for the fly. This is all part of completing the fly and securing it so that it doesn't unravel when you're casting. And the last is just the knot, the whip finish knot that one uses. In my fly tying classes, I always start off by instructing in how to tie this knot, because at this point, after you've completed the fly, you do not want to see anything go wrong by not tying the knot properly. So sometimes that can be difficult. We generally then end up with adding some cement that will ensure that the knot will stay secure. And well, this is, I don't know if you take a look at the fly. So it has a lot of color. It's a fly that is pulled under the water. You can employ various movement to it, and the attempt of the fisherman is to annoy the fish so that it will provoke a strike.
Fly fishing normally isn't practiced in the winter, but to demonstrate how one casts a fly reel, Don Travor, the owner of Don's Tackle Shop in Poughkeepsie, took us down to the icy river.
These flies are tied primarily for saltwater fishing, and of course the striped bass in the Hudson is a transient fish that comes in here to spawn, so we can use these flies to catch the stripers with. Also, they'll take large and smallmouth bass. And we tie these at our shop up there. These are tied mostly out of deer hair, some tinsel. They're fairly simple flies. It's more of an attractor pattern than anything. The white ones really imitate small bait fish. in this type of fishing, you're after fairly large sized fish, so you need a rather heavy outfit. This is a what they call Orbis Powerhouse rod. It's an 8.5 foot rod for an 8-weight line. Now, in most types of fishing, your lure is what carries the line out, like in spin fishing or bait fishing. Fly fishing, it's the other way around. The line carries the lure out. So you have to, everything's rated according to the size of the line that you throw. And with large flies, you have to go with a larger size line.
After you attach the fly to the end of the line, you are ready for the next step.
Back and forth here, and you shoot the line out into the river. You have us swimming streamers on the back end, and you work that back like so, and you wait for a strike for the fish to hit the fly, and then hopefully you land them. But these are pretty tough fish to catch sometimes this way, especially because you have to put some weight on too to get the fly down a little bit. Fly fishing is the fun way to fish because it's the tackle used is light compared to most, and you're fighting the fish more personally than you do with the other types of tackle. And so there's a lot more people going into the fly fishing end of it all the time. Of course, the biggest trouble with the Hudson is access to the river where you can do this type of fishing, because you get almost as much line out the back as you do the front, and if you're not careful, you'll catch an Amtrak train instead of what you're after. So, but this is the way you work the tackle, just simple, nice, slow motion, throw your line out, and retrieve it back in.
Let's hope some of this information can be of use to those of you who take the time to try to outfox a fish or two. That's our show this week. Thanks for joining us. We'll look for you again next week, right here on the river.